Welcome to the Upper Room. Great to be with you as always. Thank you for inviting us into your home. I don't know about you, but I love learning new words. Are you that kind of a person? And maybe you're not. You're satisfied with the words you know, and that's okay too. But I came across a new word this last week I've just got to share with you. I'll bet you've never heard this word before. Maybe you have. Let's give it a shot. Pusillanimous. Do you know what pusillanimous means? It's an adjective that means to lack courage, to be a coward, or to be markedly, contemptibly timid. Okay, the word is made up of two words that actually mean very small and mind. To be very small-minded and to be fearful, really, to be a coward. Kind of like what you see in The Wizard of Oz, right? With the cowardice lion, with the small brain. Well, that word is really appropriate for the last lesson that we covered, in case you missed us. We're in this series in the book of Acts we're calling Dynamic, but we're coming to the end of Paul's third missionary journey, and this word pusillanimous does not apply to Paul. He is anything but. You could not call him that name or use that adjective for him because, if you remember, in case you were with us, the Spirit said through a man who had the gift of prophecy that Paul now would go on to Jerusalem and he would be bound, he would be beaten, he would be abused. And so the people in Caesarea, the church in Caesarea, begged him not to go. Please don't go, Paul. Don't let that happen to you. And if you remember, Paul said, "You're breaking my heart here. Stop your crying, Put your big boy pants on because I'm going. It's what I signed up for." Okay, so that's the context now. And he will now travel 60 miles to Jerusalem. And we'll pick it up in Acts chapter 21, verse 15. However, before we do that, I need to set that up, and I'm going to ask you to indulge me for a few minutes as I give you some background. And I've touched on it before, but I want to go a little deeper so that you can see how it relates to what we're going to read about Paul in Jerusalem now. So, some 27 years ago, almost 30 years ago, Christy and I and our family were at a church in Tucson. There was a mega church, thousands of people. And while there, we transitioned from youth ministry, which we had done for some 13 years, to family ministry. And what we discovered in doing family ministry was that we had so much more effectiveness working with parents, helping them really establish a godly marriage and then helping them in training kids to be godly was so much more effective than just youth ministry, where we basically entertained kids most of the time. And so I went to our senior pastor and said, can we make this more of how we do things here at this church? And he was hesitant because a big part of that mega church was the programs for young people, children, teenagers. And so when we were offered the invitation to come to the church in Montrose, Colorado, where it was much smaller, not a tiny church, about 500 or 600 people, we thought, here is our opportunity to really focus on helping parents raise up a godly generation. We got excited about the idea of being as the senior pastor, being in a position of leadership where we could dictate that instead of parents in the church relying upon the church to entertain their kids, that we would help equip them to take on their true biblical responsibility to train up their kids to know Christ. However, in order to do that, and we told them right up front, that would mean unplugging some things, which obviously you cannot do at the mega church, but unplugging some children's activities and programs, some youth programs, so that you could really focus on parents understanding that dropping your kids off for programs is most likely, and we had experienced that in youth ministry for all those years, is most likely not the best option if you want to raise your children to know Christ and to follow Christ. And so we, again, said that right up front, but it wasn't long. It was within the first year that we began to have these really difficult conversations, and I want to let you in on a couple of them, and they were actually elders who knew that we came here to do that, and yet the response, one of them in my office, he said this specifically, and I'm not kidding you. He said, okay, we all understand that you don't like children. And I'm like, what? I don't like children? I love children so much. I want them to walk with Jesus. And we have figured out the best way for them to walk with Jesus is not to give them just activities, but for their parents to know how to train them to godliness. In an elders meeting, another elder confronted me and he said, we understand and we know that you really had some bad experiences in youth ministry. And again, I was incredulous. I did not have bad experiences in youth ministry. We had amazing experiences. We worked with, in those 13 years, over 1,000 different kids and had great times with them and loved what we did. The point is, but that is not the best way for children to learn to follow Christ for a lifetime. And so that's what I tried to describe to them again, but that continued. That was in the first year that we were here. And I was amazed for the first time in our ministry that I felt under attack. I felt as though rumors were being spread. If they're saying that to my face, what are they saying behind my back? What kind of rumors are they spreading that were absolutely untrue? What kind of accusations are they leveling against us, against me in particular, as though we hate children and we hate youth ministry? No. So I experienced that. We experienced that in our first year, and it really continued for a long, long time. Now, the reason I bring that up is not for you to feel sorry for me, because, that's part of the gig, and we learned a lot through that. However, I bring it up to you because this idea of having people spreading rumors about you that are not true, leveling accusations behind your back or to your face that are simply false, how do you deal with it? I'm not sure I dealt with it very well, to be honest with you. So that's our first discussion question. How have you dealt with the reality? And my guess is you've experienced it in some way or another, having people spread rumors about you or level accusations about you that were not true. How did you deal with that? Well, that is really what I think this text in Acts 21 is all about. And as I did not deal with that very well, we're going to find out that Paul, actually being filled with the Spirit, totally under the control of the Spirit, does a much better job dealing with it. And so we're going to learn about the rumors, and then we're going to learn about his response. And I think we'll have a lot to learn. Now, before we get into that text, I want to take you back to a very familiar thing that Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24, verse 6. Here's what he said. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. Well, most of us take that passage, and most Christians take that passage to mean he's talking about the end times. And so we get really lathered up and excited about that phrase, because when we hear it read or we read it, we say, that's us. There's wars and rumors of wars going on. But I want to tell you something, and I don't want to go deep into that, but there have always been wars and rumors of wars. And did he mean us today? Was he talking to us? I don't know. That's up for debate. But what I want to tell you and confess to you is that I understand that that idea of rumors of war really sinks deep within most of us, and we get kind of excited about it. That means we're in the last days. Again, of course we're in the last days, but I'm going to flip that, okay? I lured you in. I'm confessing to you. I lured you in with that title, and I'm going to flip it. Instead of rumors of wars, we're going to talk about the war of rumors, all right? But that does bring us to our location. We've never filmed here. We filmed in a lot of cemeteries, but never this one. We're in the Veterans Cemetery in Grand Junction, Colorado. You'll see behind me a torpedo that was from 1945, from World War II. And here on these grounds, many people who served in the military and their spouses who may have died while serving in a war are buried. It's a beautiful place. It's a great memorial. We just came off of Memorial Day, so you'll see flags, and it's just a great setting. But the idea is war. As you know by now, we're not called necessarily or spoken to in Scripture about warfare in the sense of torpedoes and bombs and tanks and battleships and aircraft that drop bombs. That's not the warfare we read about in the New Testament. But there is a warfare that is actually more important, and it is the warfare of living this life for Christ in the midst of great opposition. Of course, these rumors and attacks come from the enemy, and the book of Revelation calls him the great accuser. So when we get accusations leveled against us, it's pretty easy to see where that's actually coming from, and they are meant to distract us, disturb us, discourage us, and maybe even destroy us. And that's the setting for the text we're in. Therefore, this setting is, again, perfect. Again, we're not talking about bombs and torpedoes. We're talking about ideas. Because it is through ideas that Satan operates. That's why Paul said, take every thought captive to the obedience of Christ. He's talking about spiritual warfare. So today are some ideas, and the ideas have to do with accusations and rumors that are really part of the warfare that we're all a part of. And most of us get caught unexpectedly unaware of what's really going on, and we don't deal with it, respond to it in a way that really a Spirit-filled person, a person under the control of the Holy Spirit, should react and respond. But we'll see that Paul gives us a great blueprint for how to respond to such a setting, such warfare. And so if there was a question that we want to answer today, it's the question, how does a person under the influence, under the control of the Holy Spirit, respond to such accusations, to such rumors that are attacks upon who we are and what we do in this life for Christ? How do we best respond? Do we respond the way that Christ would have us respond? And so again, we will begin with rumors, and then we'll get to the response of Paul. But these rumors come in three waves, and this may surprise you. It's kind of fun. It comes in the wave of the church. Rumors in the church? Are you kidding me? I thought that was recent. No, it's always been there. Rumors and accusations from the church. Secondly, from the canines. And then third, from a commander. All right, we're going to read a lot of text. Hang with me. Turn your Bible pages over to Acts 21. Here we go. When we arrived at Jerusalem, that tells you that Luke, who is writing this, is with Paul and his team, and they know what they're in store for. It's been predicted by the Spirit of God through a man with the gift of prophecy. When we arrived at Jerusalem, that 60-mile walk to the southeast from Caesarea, the brothers and sisters received us warmly. The next day, Paul and the rest of us went to see James, that is the brother of Jesus, who is the pastor of the Church of Jerusalem. The Church of Jerusalem is in the thousands, and he is the pastor, all right? This is huge. So they meet up with James, the brother of Jesus, and it goes on to tell us, and all the elders were present. We don't know how many elders they had by then, but they had overseers by then. So this is about 57 AD. We're talking about 24 years after the Spirit came and started the church. Now on to verse 19. Paul greeted them and reported in detail what God had done among the Gentiles through his ministry. We'll talk a lot more about that in just a little bit. Verse 20. When they heard this, they praised God. Then they said to Paul, okay, so on the one hand, they're praising God for all that God's done with the Gentiles. Then they said this to Paul. You see, brother, how many thousands of Jews have believed in Christ, and all of them are zealous for the law, meaning they love Christ, they're following Christ, but they still love everything they knew before Christ. They love Judaism. They love the laws, the festivals, everything. They hold on to it passionately. Verse 21, they have been informed. That's a really important word. It's the word from which we get catechism, which means repetition in learning. So whatever they're about to say to Paul is that all of us, thousands of Jewish followers of Christ, have been repetitiously taught something. So what is it that they have been taught through repetition? You may be surprised. Here it goes. They have been informed that you teach all the Jews who live among the Gentiles to turn away from Moses, telling them not to circumcise their children or live according to our customs. What shall we do? They will certainly hear that you have come. Do you get this? They're petrified. James and the elders are petrified about what's going to happen. This could blow up. This could be irreversible. That you have shown up, and this is what they've been taught. And now here's their suggestion to Paul. Verse 23. So, do what we tell you. Wow. Paul, for many years, has been experiencing the Spirit doing amazing things through him. And he has a lot to tell them, and now they're telling him what he must do. We'll come back to that. Verse 23, part 2. There are 4 men with us who have made a vow. This is most likely a Nazirite vow. And you're familiar with the Nazirite vows of people like Samson and Samuel and even John the Baptist. Those were lifelong vows. This most likely is a Nazirite vow that just lasted 30 days, just a month. Okay, so they say we have these 4 guys who are at the end of their Nazirite vow, at the end of the month of their pledge, their vow. They say, take these men, join in their purification rites, and pay their expenses so that they can have their heads shaved. Then everyone will know there is no truth in the reports about you, but that you yourself are living in obedience to the law. As for the Gentile believers, we have written to them our decision that they should abstain from food sacrificed to idols, from blood, from the meat of strangled animals, and from sexual immorality. They're referring to what we studied in Acts 15, the Jerusalem Council, and they say, the Gentiles, we have told them what to do. We're concerned now that the Jewish people here think you are turning against Moses and against everything we know. So do this, and this will verify you haven't done that. Verse 26, the next day, Paul took the men and purified himself along with them. Then he went to the temple to give notice of the date when the days of purification would end, and the offering would be made for each of them. Okay, let's summarize this. Paul and his team show up in Jerusalem bringing gifts to the suffering church from the church in Asia Minor. They're bringing financial gifts to relieve some of the suffering. They show up, tell of what God has done, great news, everybody's happy, and all of a sudden things get wacky. James and the elders say, okay, we got a problem. Everybody thinks you've turned against Moses. They're going to find out. This thing's going to get ugly. So, here's our solution. We have these 4 guys that need your help. They need you to go with them and pay for their shaved heads to end their vows. And by doing that, everybody will go, oh, all that was untrue about Paul. And the question becomes, how will Paul deal with being told what he should do, which, by the way, is not a command from God? Well, we just saw it. He submitted. We'll come back to that later. So that's the wave of rumors and accusations from the church. Now we come to the wave that comes from the canines. Now, what do I mean by the canines? If you're familiar with the book of Philippians, specifically Philippians chapter 3, verses 2 and 3, Paul writes to the church in Philippi and refers to Jewish people who claim the name of Christ, but who have been following him around in Asia Minor from church to church and undermining who he is, spreading rumors and accusations about him. And when he refers to them in the letter to the church in Philippi, he calls them dogs, these dogs. Oh, what a compliment! He refers to them as dogs. Not a compliment. In that culture, in that time, to be called a dog was not what it means today. Okay, so it was definitely a demeaning and pretty much an angry statement about the lack of character of these Jewish men following him around. Why do I tell you that? Because now in verse 27, these men seem to have showed up in Jerusalem. Here we go. The 7 days were almost ended when some Jews from the province of Asia, okay, that's these guys, saw Paul in the temple and roused a mob against him. Okay, it's Pentecost. They have come for Pentecost, the great festival of Pentecost. And we're about to find out that these guys were likely from Ephesus because of what they're about to say about Paul. But the point is this: the accusations they're going to level against him now are false, of course, as they have been. The rumors they have spread are not true. And so we read the rest of it. They grabbed him, yelling, "Men of Israel, help us! This is the man who preaches against our people everywhere and tells everybody to disobey the Jewish laws. He speaks against the temple and even defiles this holy place by bringing in Gentiles." And then they refer to this. For earlier that day, they had seen him in the city with Trophimus, a Gentile from Ephesus, and they assumed Paul had taken him into the temple beyond the court of Gentiles, which was forbidden. And so they're telling everybody that he actually did that. They don't know that to be true, but it works in their favor to make an accusation. As untrue as it is, that's what they're going to do to Paul now. Verse 30, the whole city was rocked by these accusations, and a great riot followed. Paul was grabbed and dragged out of the temple, and immediately the gates were closed behind him. As they were trying to kill him, they had to get him outside the gates because it was unlawful to kill someone inside the gates of the temple of Jerusalem. They drug him outside the gate to kill him. The word reached the commander of the Roman regiment that all Jerusalem was in an uproar. He immediately called out to his soldiers and officers and ran down among the crowd. When the mob saw the commander and the troops coming, they stopped beating Paul. Okay, fort stood above the temple. It's where the Roman guards and the Roman commander would look over the grounds to make sure everything was peaceful. Obviously things are going the wrong way, and so the commander and his troops storm out there and stop them from killing Paul. But who is it that really instigated this? The canines. Started with the church having these beliefs about Paul that weren't true, rumors about him that weren't true. Now the canines continue to spread untrue rumors and accusations against him. And now the commander shows up, the Roman commander who does not want anything to do with upheaval or rioting. He's not going to put up with it because that's his job, to keep peace in Jerusalem on behalf of Rome. And so now the commander has shown up in verse 33. Then the commander arrested him and ordered him bound with 2 chains. He asked the crowd who he was and what he had done. Some shouted one thing and some another. That's a sure sign that it's false accusations and rumor. Nobody can agree on the story. Since he couldn't find out the truth in all the uproar and confusion, he ordered that Paul be taken to the fortress, the one I told you about. As Paul reached the stairs, the mob grew so violent, the soldiers had to lift him on their shoulders to protect him. And the crowd followed behind, shouting, "Kill him! Kill him!" Sound familiar? A quarter of a century earlier, they said the same things about Jesus. Verse 37. As Paul was about to be taken inside, he said to the commander, "Help! This is really unfair." Now, listen to what he says, very calmly. "May I have a word with you?" Can you imagine? People trying to kill you. They're rioting. The soldiers barely save him by putting him on their shoulders. And he simply calmly says to the commander, "I have a word with you." And the commander says this. "Do you know Greek?" The commander asked, surprised. "Aren't you the Egyptian who led a rebellion some time ago and took 4,000 members of the assassins out into the desert?" What's he talking about? Historically, this is a reality that there were assassins from Egypt that came in and they trained other assassins so that they would create riots. Roman soldiers would come in and they would ambush them, assassinate them, okay? And that had happened at least a time or two, and the leader of that group had escaped. And so he assumed they were so angry with Paul that he was that guy, having returned. So you can understand that the rumor, the accusation was, that went around the guard and around the soldiers and around those with the commanders, that there's that Egyptian assassin organizing another coup, if you will. That's what's leveled against him now. But he speaks to him in Greek, which shocks the commander. And that's why he said, "Did you just speak in Greek?" We'll later find out that this commander's name is Lysias, and he is so intrigued by who Paul is now. Paul says, "No, I'm a Jew and a citizen of Tarsus in Cilicia, which is an important city. Please let me talk to these people." The commander agreed, so Paul stood on the stairs and motioned to the people to be quiet. Soon a deep silence enveloped the crowd, and he addressed them in their own language, Aramaic. And we stopped there. You just saw 3 waves of rumors and accusations, first from the church, then from the canines, the dogs, as Paul called them when he wrote to the Philippians, and now from the commander, who levels accusations against him that are totally untrue. But when he speaks calmly to the commander and speaks in a language that he did not expect, one that he understood, Paul says, "No, I'm actually this person." And now he'll have the opportunity to address the crowd. We'll pick that up in the next lesson. For now, you've seen the rumors, you've seen the accusations, and it is war, right? I mean, this is war. Now we look at his response. We have to go back into the passage to see Paul's response. You've already seen it. Whether you noticed it in various places, I'm not sure, so let's look at him quickly. First of all, what you need to know is his response is absolute humility. He is not enraged. He's not throwing accusations back at people. He's not fighting and quarreling. There's absolute humility. Remember, he's there bringing gifts. Notice when he got there with those financial gifts, which would make all the difference to the church in Jerusalem, he did not parade around and say, "Look at all the money I raised for you." That wasn't why he was there. And then remember that when these elders and Pastor James said, "Here's what you have to do," Paul could have very easily pulled rank on them and said, "Who are you to tell me what I have to do?" He did not do that. Remember that? So I go back to chapter 21, verse 19. After greeting them, Paul gave a detailed account of the things God had accomplished. Not he had accomplished. This was about God. The gifts are about God. All the accomplishments are God's accomplishments. And then in verse 23 is where they said, "Here's what you have to do." And he simply submits to these elders and James. He again does not quibble with them and say, "You have no right to tell me what to do." Robert Morrison was the first missionary to China, and he translated the Bible into Chinese. And here's what he had to say about the mission field. "The great fault, I think, in our mission is that no one likes to be second." Wow. You're kidding. Missionaries go because they're servants, right? Even in China on the mission field, he said, our problems are that no one wants to be second. Everybody wants to be in charge. It's about them. Isn't that amazing? And then J. Oswald Sanders, in his book, Spiritual Leadership, says this: "The world has yet to see what could happen if everyone lost the desire to get the glory. Wouldn't it be a marvelous place if nobody cared who got the credit?" That's Paul. Doesn't need the credit. Doesn't need to be first place. He submits. Humble attitude. His humility and that response to what accusations come against him are incredible. So much we can learn from him. And so we're going to define humility this way: an attitude of the heart that prompts us to choose to do things we know we don't have to do, and do so with a joyful heart. So Paul's response is one of humility, and there are 2 reasons I want to cite why he responded this way. Number 1, that's Jesus. If I want to be like Jesus, Jesus was the living example of ultimate humility. I'll read you a passage about that. Secondly, humility is the only response to have if the ultimate goal is to share Christ, share the great news of Christ with somebody. That's their greatest need. Their greatest need is not to be put in their place. Their greatest need is not to be humiliated in exchange. I take you to Philippians chapter 2, very familiar passage, verse 3. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit, rather in humility. In humility. Value others above yourself, not looking to your own interests, but each of you to the interests of the others. In your relationships with one another, have the same mindset as Jesus Christ. What was Jesus' mindset? He goes on to describe it. Who, being in very nature God, did not consider equality with God something to be used for his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the very nature of a servant, being made in human likeness, and being found in appearance as a man, he humbled. That word literally means there to go low from mountains to a valley. He went down, he descended, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. And then we know that God highly exalted him, and everybody will bow to him at some point. The point is, Paul says, if Jesus is who I want to be like, humility is the only way to live. And then, of course, the idea that through humility you will still have the opportunity to share the most important news anyone has ever heard. And Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verse 19. I'm going to read it from Peterson's Message. Even though I am free of the demands and expectations of everyone, I have voluntarily become a servant to any and all in order to reach a wide range of people, religious, non-religious, meticulous moralists, loose-living immoralists, the defeated, the demoralized, whoever. I didn't take on their way of life. I kept my bearings in Christ, but I entered their world and tried to experience things from their point of view. I've become just about every sort of servant there is in my attempts to lead those I meet into a God-saved life. I did all this because of the message. I didn't just want to talk about it, I wanted to be in on it. To be in on sharing the greatest news of all time to people who desperately need it has a pathway of humility, serving others, not humiliating them or putting them in their place because you want to make sure that everybody knows the truth. Now one may ask, wasn't Paul just compromising the gospel here by not standing up against these people? Remember that the book of Acts is a book of transition. It's a time of transition from the old to the new. That is what they were dealing with the Council of Jerusalem in Acts 15, saying, here's how we will work this out, this transition time for the Jews and the Gentiles to learn to do life together. The Jews also believed that the law originated with God, so it should be held onto. It'll take some time for them to work their way through that. And ultimately, 70 AD, God will allow Rome to destroy Jerusalem, and that will be the official end. From that point on, we don't hear of this struggle between holding on to the Jewish culture, the Jewish traditions, the festivals, the laws, and also serving Christ. So the time is coming, but for this 40-year period, almost a 40-year period, it's a time of transition. So no, Paul is not compromising. He is simply understanding how God has taught him to humbly work through the transition time. Something that we need to remember. I ran across this phrase and I want to read it to you because it applies right here. The display of a humble heart gains us access to a holy hearing. That's what's happening here. The humble heart of Paul is now going to give him access to the hearts and minds and ears, not just of the commander, but of all those people who have been manipulated into thinking something untrue about him. How? Because he did not respond in anger as most of us do. Respond in saying, I'm hurt and I'm going to defend myself. It's just an opportunity for Paul, as it is for us. You might remember that Jesus, when being arrested, and Peter saying, let's go to war, he responds by saying, don't you think I could call tens of thousands of angels and just take care of this in a second? That's not the will of my Father. This is an opportunity, the opportunity of all history for me to love the world. And so in a sense, what we learned from Paul, his response, is there comes a time when we need to eat some humble pie. Eat some humble pie. When's the last time you ate humble pie? You just accepted the fact that people are going to accuse you of things. People are going to spread rumors about you that aren't true. Have you accepted that because there's something bigger on the table than my own pride and standing up for my own ego? In June of 2015, the Supreme Court of our country came down with a new law, a new ruling, and that is that gay marriage is now the law of the land. My discussion question for you regarding that is, how did you react? I'm sure you remember that. How did you react to that ruling? What was your response? Well, I can tell you that most Christians I know responded in absolute anger, because we have been living with this idea for a long time, most of us all of our lives, that we live in a Christian nation. And a Christian nation cannot have that kind of in-your-face rebellion against God. And we were up in arms, and we could not stand the people that made this happen. We found it detestable, and we wanted some justice to this happening. However, if we were to take Paul's response to godless people who are doing godless things, maybe that would have been a good time to eat some humble pie and say, wow, we were thinking this was a Christian nation. Obviously, it's not. If it was, such a ruling would not have taken place. Therefore, what are we to do? Or what have we done to bring us to this place? Maybe, just maybe, it's on us now to make sure that we show the difference between godless marriages and godly marriages. I didn't hear anybody talk about that, really. Maybe it's time for us to raise godly kids instead of godless kids. We are so integrated into our culture that our response is one of anger and refusal to believe that this could happen, instead of saying, maybe it all starts with us. And maybe we need to look at our own lives and say, what should happen next? Gaining a hearing with a godless culture by having marriages that they desire to have in their own lives. I understand that what I just said may really rub you the wrong way, but the reality is we seldom eat humble pie and really find fault in our own lives before the obvious fault in everybody else's lives. I want to end with a great story that comes from over 100 years ago, I'm sure. A group of English tourists were touring around England, and they came to the place that held Beethoven's original piano. And as they came into this room, and you could just hear the gasp on people, this is Beethoven's piano, wow! And they were talking about it, and that he had composed and played on this very piano, and most of the people just stood silently. However, one young woman forced her way from the back of the crowd to the front, sat down at the piano, and began to play one of Beethoven's. And she played it through, and then she stopped, and she turned around, and she said to the guide, I'll bet a lot of people have enjoyed playing this piano. To which he responded, actually, just about a few months ago, the great composer and pianist from Poland, Ignacy Paderewski, was in our group touring. And when some people asked him to sit down and play, which he certainly could have, as well as Beethoven, his response was this: no, I cannot. I am not worthy. Wow. It reminds me of John the Baptist when he met Jesus. I am unworthy of even tying his sandals. And then his ultimate decree, I must decrease and he must increase. A life of humility. I want to end with this question, and a question you can carry on to your discussion time, and it is this: why is it, do you believe, that in our current modern Christian culture, most people around us in this world recognize us more by our opinions, especially political opinions, than by our humility? That's a tough one, isn't it? Because that's a reality. For the most part, Christians in our culture today are not known for their humility, which is the path to being like Jesus and to sharing the greatest news ever shared, but we're known because we have our opinions. Because my opinion is about me, and it puts me at center stage in the spotlight. Don't you love what Paul did here? Simply amazing if you really look beneath the surface. All these ways of antagonism and accusations and rumors that he did not deserve. And yet he submitted himself, and yet he saw it as an opportunity to exalt Christ. Thanks for joining us in this beautiful setting. A lot of war stories for the people who are buried here, I'm sure, could be shared. But this war story is maybe more significant than any of them. We love you. Thanks for doing the journey with us. God bless you all.